Hey class, let's continue on with Chapter 5, the skeletal system. And today we're going to focus on bone fractures. A fracture is defined as any break in a bone. The cause is most likely going to be from some kind of exceptional trauma that either twists or smashes the bone. This can occur in a lot of different scenarios. The most common ones are going to be sports, automobile accidents, and this includes not only cars, but this includes, I would say, e-bikes that are now coming out. We see a lot of e-bike crashes happening with young children, and then even falls. One thing to note is that the older you get, your bones are going to start thinning and weakening as you age. And when bones thin and weaken, this is going to cause more fractures. It is the same reason why, if you are a child and you fall, you're able to easily bounce back up and be all right. Whereas if my grandmother fell, it would be a lot harder on her, and she has, again, a higher percentage of getting a fracture. There are two overarching types of bone fractures. The first type is called a closed or simple fracture. This is when the bone does not penetrate through the skin. The opposite of this is going to be called an open, or we call this a compound fracture. Again, when the bone breaks, it penetrates through the skin. This image here shows the two differences between this. Again, this is an open, or we call that a compound fracture. We see that bone poking through the skin here. A couple years back, I watched this happen to a gymnast, and it was a very gruesome video. And it's not something you ever want to happen. It's very painful. And then over here, we have a closed, or we call this a simple fracture, where when the bone breaks, it still stays within the confines of our skin. From there, we can actually talk about 6 common types of fractures. This slide right here, while it is an image, is going to be used to fill out your notes. So you want to make sure that in your notes, we get the blanks filled in for each of these different fracture types descriptions and little comments or tidbits of information to know about the fracture type. The first type of fracture type that we're going to talk about is the comminuted fracture. This is when the bone breaks into 3 or more fragments. This is going to be very common in older people whose bones have become more brittle. So here, this first image is actually illustrating the comminuted fracture. We see a bone here. Again, we see several bone pieces that are broken. The second type is called a compression fracture. This occurs when the bone is crushed. Again, this is very common in people who have very porous bones or osteoporotic bones of older people. There is no image on this slide that shows a compression fracture, so I put one on this slide. It's very common in the vertebrae of your spine. Again, compression, compressed. We see gravity and things pressing down on this bone, causing it to fracture. The third type is called a depressed fracture. This is when the broken bone portion is pressed inward, and this is very typical of a skull fracture. So this picture right here shows a depressed, where again it's pushed inward. The fourth type is an impacted fracture. This is where the broken bone ends are forced into each other. This type of fracture is very common when people try to put out their arms and catch themselves when they fall. There is not a picture of an impacted fracture on this slide, so here's where we are most likely going to see an impacted. The first part of the bone that broke off and the other part of the bone breaks off gets rammed into each other. The fifth type is called a spiral fracture. This is where we get a very ragged break, and it's because there was either an excessive twisting force applied to the bone or somehow you twisted it as you fell. This is very common in sports fractures, If we think about how we play sports, even football, you twirl and you turn. In basketball, you're doing a lot of turning, so you're doing a lot of those twisting force motions, and this is where we see a lot of these spiral fractures. And the last type is called a green stick fracture. This is where the bone breaks incompletely. It does this a lot in children whose bones are a lot more flexible and not as brittle. And so again, it's not a clean break. Again, we see that incomplete break. Now, when bones are fractured, we have to be able to treat them. And so oftentimes your parents are going to take you to a doctor. The first thing that they're going to do once they figure out that the bone is fractured is they're going to make sure that the broken bone pieces are realigned. And we call this realignment of broken bone ends reduction. There are two types of reduction depending on the severity of the break of a bone. And the first type is called a closed reduction. This is when bones are just manually coaxed into position by the physician's hands. The second is an open reduction. This is for more severe breaks, and this is where the bones have to be secured with pins or wires during surgery in order to make sure that it lines up and gets the proper position for correct healing. After they realign those broken bones, the second thing that a doctor is going to do is immobilize it. Immobilization can happen two ways. The first is through the use of a cast, which is what you typically see. The second way is through traction, and you might not know what that is, but if you were to go to a doctor's office, let's see if I can find it. Here would be an example of a traction. We have the wires kind of holding your leg up in position. And then here, I put this picture in here because, again, it shows if we have two bones, we want to realign them, and sometimes it takes screws or rods in order to keep those bones in place. Now, once you get your bone realigned and immobilized, they're going to make you keep your cast on for several weeks. And the reason for this is because bone healing time when you have a fracture takes about 6 to 8 weeks. This is going to be a lot longer for larger bones, and this time frame can also be longer for those who are older because, again, their bones require more attention. The other reason for this is because when you're older, you tend to have not as good of a circulation, which means your blood's not pumping through your body as well as it did when you were younger. And blood is what's important at bringing those nutrients to the bone to make sure that it's healing. So we see a delayed or longer time for older people to recover. Okay. We talked about this picture and traction. The last thing that we are going to talk about is after a doctor realigns the bones and immobilizes it, what happens within your body that allows bones to repair or heal themselves? And this occurs through 4 major steps. The first step is a hematoma is going to form. Essentially, what a hematoma is it's a blood-filled swelling or essentially a bruise. A lot of blood's going to go to that area. And remember, blood carries nutrients and oxygen and things that are needed for cells to grow and thrive. Once blood gets to the area and it kind of clots it off, it's going to start forming a fibrocartilage callus. Again, fibrocartilage callus is just cartilage matrix, a little bit of bony matrix, and a lot of collagen fibers are going to go into that area and close that gap between the two broken pieces. The third step then would be the bony callus, because bones aren't made up of fibrocartilage, bones are made up of bones. So once we get that fibrocartilage model, this bony matrix is going to come in and replace that fibrocartilage. And this is done through the use of osteoblasts and osteoclasts. If hopefully we remember from our last lesson, and if not, we'll go over it. Osteoblasts are bone forming cells, and osteoclasts are bone destroying cells. Again, they're going to create this bony callus. And then once the bony callus is formed, Bone remodeling is going to occur or start to take place based on different mechanical stressors that are happening. When I say mechanical stresses, I'm talking about gravity when you're standing up and your bone and pulling down on you, and muscles. When your muscles pull on those bones, they're going to cause mechanical stresses. That's going to tell you where does bone remodeling need to take place. This image I included in your notes, and it's also here included in the lesson to kind of show the 4 major stages of healing. Here we have the hematoma, or a lot of blood going into this area. Second, we have this fibrocartilage, which is represented in blue to kind of form that gap between the 2 broken bones. We get these blood vessels moving in. Eventually, a bony callus is going to form. And so here we see the bony callus, and it said this on the last slide, but I did not point it out. It's made up of spongy bone. And eventually bone remodeling is going to occur where that spongy bone kind of becomes compact bone that we see. And hopefully our bone heals properly, and then you can build back up strength. That is the end of today's lesson. If you have any questions, please make sure you ask, and I hope you guys have a great day.